They saw a janitor with a mop. What they didn't see was the Ghost Medic of Korath. Sergeant Elena Cruz pushed an industrial mop across the polished floor of Fort Granite's central weapons depot. Around her, the place pulsed with energy boots pounding. Marines shouting inventory lists, visiting SEALs inspecting crates of gear. The air smelled of oil, sweat, and discipline. To them, she was invisible. Just another young woman in a faded uniform, hair pinned back in regulation style, keeping the depot clean. But beneath the surface lived a combat medic who had once crawled through hell itself. From which city or country are you watching this mission? Drop your location in the comments and report in like a Marine. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next operation. Her uniform carried no marks of the past, no patches, no outward reminder of battle. The only evidence was folded carefully in her pocket, the official citations for her Silver Valor Cross and Crimson Shield Medal. She carried them not to show off, but to remind herself of who she had been when the world insisted she was someone else. 6 months earlier, after the ambush in the Corath Highlands, doctors had declared her unfit for combat duty. Shrapnel lodged deep in her shoulder, torn ligaments in her knee enough to place her on limited duty until a medical review could decide her future. The Corps had reassigned her to facility maintenance. It was supposed to be temporary, but the days stretched long, and each one chipped away at her sense of purpose. Still, Elena told herself every Marine job mattered. If she couldn't carry a rifle, she would carry the floors others trained on. If she couldn't save men under fire, she would preserve the ground where they prepared for it. Service was service. That conviction kept her moving. Even when whispers followed her down the halls, she had enlisted right after high school in a small Louisiana town. Inspired by her grandfather's stories of Vietnam sacrifice, fraternity, honor. By 20, she was in uniform with the 5th Marine Expeditionary Unit, patching wounds in dust-choked valleys, holding pressure on arteries while bullets cracked overhead. She built her reputation not on words, but on grit and hands that refused to stop working until every Marine under her care had a chance at life. It was on her second deployment, in the jagged ridges of Corath, that fate carved her name into legend. Her convoy hit an IED, the explosion splitting vehicles apart as machine gun fire rained down from the slopes. Cruz crawled into the kill zone 3 times, dragging men out while tracers licked the dirt around her face. She kept moving, even after shrapnel tore into her shoulder and her knee buckled beneath her weight. 62 minutes of chaos and courage. 3 Marines survived because she refused to let them die. That was the day she earned the Silver Valor Cross and Crimson Shield Medal. But medals couldn't stitch tendons or erase pain. By the time she returned stateside, the doctors pulled her from the fight. She swallowed it, told herself she still served. But at night, the silence pressed heavy, whispering that she was becoming invisible. This morning began like all the others. Elena filled out her requisition slip for cleaning supplies, folded it neatly, and carried it to the counter. The routine felt like ritual, an echo of the endless paperwork that marked her new life. Behind the counter loomed Staff Sergeant Halpern. Halpern had never deployed, but in this depot, he was king for years. He had bullied supply clerks and maintenance staff, lording over every requisition slip. Officers tolerated him because he kept the supply chain flowing. Marines whispered about him but rarely challenged him, and he thrived on that silence. Elena slid the form across the steel surface. Halpern picked it up with deliberate slowness, eyes dragging over the paper before landing on her. A smirk curved his mouth, the kind that carried more contempt than words ever could. "Why don't you get a real Marine to sign this, sweetheart?" The words detonated in the depot. Conversations faltered, metal clanged. Even the SEALs, bent-over gear manifests nearby, lifted their heads. Elena's stomach knotted, but her voice stayed steady. "I am a Marine. This authorization is valid. Halpern's laugh rang out, bouncing off racks of rifles. Maybe stick to women's work. A mop doesn't make you a warrior. The room stilled. Boots stopped shuffling. Pens froze mid-note. Marines kept their eyes fixed on clipboards and crates, but every ear strained toward the counter. The humiliation struck harder than any round she had ever taken. Elena remembered the ridges of Corath, the blood, the dirt, the sound of rounds snapping past her face, and, for the first time, she realized this moment cut deeper, not because of danger, but because of dismissal. Out there, her brothers had depended on her. Here, her brothers looked away. She clenched the steel edge of the counter until her knuckles blanched. The citation papers pressed against her thigh, their weight a reminder that courage wasn't a memory, it was part of her blood. But in this depot, courage was drowned beneath contempt. Halpern leaned closer, his voice rising so the whole room could hear. Try laundry, cruise, or food service. Something more your speed. His tone wasn't just mockery. It was a public stripping of her identity. Every syllable cut away at her service, her sacrifice, her worth. The silence of the others hurt worse than his words. Marines avoided her gaze, hiding behind paperwork and busy work. A few looked guilty. Most looked relieved it wasn't them in her place. It was the silence that betrayed her, louder than the insult itself. She wanted to shout, to remind them she had bled for them, dragged men twice her weight through fire, refused to die so they could live. But the words stuck, smothered by months of invisibility. Halpern smirked wider. Go on. Cruz. Show us what kind of Marine you really are. The depot held its breath, every eye fixed on her, waiting to see if she would break. They thought silence would protect them. But silence was the loudest betrayal of all, and Elena Cruz stood alone in the storm. Halpern leaned across the counter, voice dripping with disdain. Try laundry, cruise, or food service, something that actually fits you. Every syllable was a scalpel, carving away her service, her sacrifice, her worth as a Marine. His tone wasn't just mockery, it was dismissal. A public erasure of everything she had bled for. Elena's hands locked on the steel edge until her knuckles blanched. The folded citation papers for her medals pressed against her thigh, their weight both an anchor and a reminder of battles survived. Her mind flared back to the Corath Highlands, her squad pinned under relentless machine gun fire, dirt exploding inches from her face. The taste of iron and dust in her mouth as she crawled into the kill zone 3 times to drag Marines to safety. Shrapnel tearing her shoulder, her knee buckling. Courage then was simple rescue, or die trying. Now, in the depot, that same courage was trapped in her chest, suffocating against the walls of indifference. She scanned the room. Marines avoided her eyes, pretending to shuffle papers or polish rifles that didn't need polishing. Some knew her story, others had heard whispers of the Ghost Medic of Korath. But none spoke, none moved. Their silence struck harder than Halpern's insults. It was betrayal, not born of hatred, but of cowardice. She wanted to scream, I carried men twice my weight through fire. I bled for you. I saved lives while you hid. But the words stayed lodged in her throat, smothered by months of invisibility. Halpern snatched the requisition slip off the counter. With a slow, theatrical motion, he tore it into pieces, then quarters, then confetti. He let the fragments scatter to the floor like ashes, grinding one beneath his boot for emphasis. Marines shifted uneasily, but no one stepped forward. Elena's breath caught sharp, as if each scrap were a fragment of her service shredded in front of their eyes. She tried again, voice taut but steady. I have the right authorization. I only need the basic supplies to finish my enough. Halpern's roar rattled the shelves. Know your place in the chain. Stop wasting real Marines' time. The depot grew tense. Boots shuffled, whispers swirled, and Marines edged closer, drawn like moths to a flame. What began as an insult had become a spectacle. a public unmasking meant to strip her of dignity. Among the gathering stood Lieutenant Commander Jason Ward, tall, broad-shouldered, a special warfare officer forged in 4 deployments. His jaw clenched, his hands flexed at his sides. Ward had carried brothers home in silence. He had lived by a creed that no comrade should ever be abandoned. Watching this humiliation clawed against every fiber of his discipline, his teammates exchanged glances, sensing the storm building behind his calm. Elena's eyes stung, but she refused the tears. Alone, in her quarters, she had cried enough grieving her lost role, her lost voice. The pieces of herself left on the slopes of Corath, but not here. Not in front of Halpern, not in front of a room full of Marines who pretended she was invisible. She would not give him that victory. Halpern smirked, leaning closer, his voice low, venomous. "Face it, Cruz. You're nothing but a janitor in uniform." The depot fell silent. Ward's fists clenched, and for the first time, someone was about to move. One insult too far, one room too silent, and one warrior who refused to stay seated any longer. When Halpern's words curdled the air, even the most jaded Marines shifted. Some muttered that he had crossed a line. Most kept their eyes down, unwilling to challenge a man who controlled every requisition slip in the depot. But Ward had heard enough. He stepped forward, stride deliberate, the kind of walk that carried the weight of a man who had led warriors through kill zones and brought them home. His very presence seemed to pull the noise from the room. Marines straightened. SEALs watched closely, recognizing the quiet fury in his eyes. Halpern opened his mouth, but froze as Ward's stare pinned him. The tension in the depot thickened into silence. Ward's voice was calm but resonant, carrying with the authority of a combat brief. "Staff Sergeant, issue her a new requisition form. Now, if you won't. I'll call the OIC myself." The command cut clean through the depot. For the first time, Halpern's confidence faltered. Ward turned to the room. "Do you even know who you're mocking?" His tone was low, deliberate. "Sergeant Elena Cruz, Silver Valor Cross, Crimson Shield Medal, the Ghost Medic of Korath." A ripple of recognition spread. Some Marines blinked in shock, others stiffened, guilt flickering across their faces. Ward continued. "I read the after-action report myself. She crawled into a kill zone 3 times, wounded, to drag Marines out alive. 62 minutes under fire, 3 lives saved. That's more courage than most of us show in a lifetime. And you," his eyes locked on Halpern, "tried to erase it because you couldn't see past a mop. It wasn't anger. It was testimony." Every word fell like a hammer in the silence. Then Ward did something no one in that depot would ever forget. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, heavy coin, and placed it gently on the counter in front of Elena. A SEAL Challenge coin, a tradition as old as the teams themselves, passed only in moments of true respect. He looked her in the eye. "A warrior of your caliber deserves honor, not humiliation." The depot froze. Weapons hung forgotten. Even the air seemed to pause. A challenge coin from a SEAL was not given lightly. It was a bond, a salute, a recognition that went deeper than rank or patch. Heads turned not to Halpern, not even to Ward, but to Elena Cruz. She now carried more than a slip of paper. She carried the weight of every eye in that room, waiting to see what she would do next. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, Marines who had stood silent while Elena Cruz was humiliated began stepping forward. Some mumbled apologies. Others bowed their heads in shame. The silence that once protected Halpern now collapsed around him. Behind the counter, his face had gone pale, his pride crushed beneath the weight of what had just unfolded. His hands shook as he fumbled to process a new requisition slip, desperate to salvage some shred of dignity. Elena's hands trembled too, not from fear, but from a surge of emotion she hadn't felt in months. For the first time since the Korath Highlands, She was seen not as a custodian of floors, but as the custodian of lives. The sealed challenge coin on the counter before her carried more weight than steel. It was no symbol of pity. It was recognition. Ward's voice carried again, steady and deliberate, slicing through the depot's stillness. Every veteran carries unseen battles. Some wear ribbons, some wear scars, some wear silence, but every one of them deserves respect. His words reshaped the air. Men and women who had avoided Elena's eyes now looked at her differently, like she had never left the battlefield at all. By nightfall, the story had spread across Fort Granite. Within days, Cruz's old commanders and brothers-in-arms called her, their voices cracking with pride. The leadership of the Corps took notice, launching a preliminary review into how such a culture of silence had been allowed to fester. What began as one man's sneer had become a mirror held up to the entire base. 3 weeks later, Elena was reassigned not to a desk, not to maintenance, but to Fort Granite Academy. There, she began training recruits in battlefield medicine and combat readiness. It wasn't charity, it wasn't sympathy. It was recognition that her skills, her grit, and her knowledge of war were too valuable to be left scrubbing floors. The armory incident became legend. New initiatives were introduced training on military respect, programs to honor diverse service records, policies ensuring that every Marine combat or support was treated with dignity. Even Halpern was placed under disciplinary review, ordered into counseling and leadership retraining. A single confrontation had sparked a cultural reckoning. When it was over, Elena returned Ward's coin with a handwritten note. I didn't need to keep it, because I never stopped being a Marine, but thank you for reminding them. She had held onto it for exactly 1 hour, long enough to let the truth settle deep inside her chest. Value does not vanish with reassignment. Worth is not erased by a mop or a change of orders. A warrior's strength is not measured by what's stitched to a sleeve, but by what burns inside the heart. Every base has its ghosts, heroes whose battles no one sees. The real test of brotherhood is simple. Will you look away in silence, or will you have the courage to stand and see the warrior within?